I refused them all. When my parents sat me down and told me it was time to choose, that the family needed a marriage alliance with one of the three major wealthy families, and that I would be the one to secure it, they expected me to do what I had always done. Comply. Choose from the options placed in front of me. Accept the life that had been arranged. I had lived that life already. I knew exactly how it ended. In my previous life, I had chosen Lu Ruan first. She was the obvious choice, elegant, accomplished, from a family whose resources could shore up ours. I told myself it would work. I told myself a lot of things in those days that turned out not to be true. Lu Ruan was absent for 364 days of every year we were married. She made me a quiet joke in social circles without ever seeming to notice or care. And then she died in a car accident. Not recklessly, not carelessly, but deliberately, throwing herself into harm's way to protect the man she actually loved. I was left alone in a house that had never felt like a home, a young widower with too many rooms and too much silence. My family, sympathetic but practical, arranged a second match. Shinjuchu this time. I entered that marriage with diminished expectations and was still disappointed. She ignored our life together with the focused efficiency of someone managing an obligation. In the second year, she died in a high-stakes street race. For Zhang Yida, it emerged, though I didn't understand that fully until much later. What I understood immediately was the new name that attached itself to me in social circles. Jink's husband. The man whose wives die. The man who brings ruin to the women he marries. I was 30 years old when I finally married Leah. By then I had learned to want very little, and she had apparently learned the same. We treated each other with quiet courtesy, maintained a functional household, and grew old together without ever quite closing the distance between us. I told myself it was enough. Perhaps it was by certain measures. But just before she died, Leah took my hand. Her grip was weaker than it had ever been, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. She said, "Liangchen, if there's an afterlife, please don't choose me. I only want to be with Yida." I sat with her hand in mine and felt something I couldn't immediately name. It was only in that moment, with her dying words still in the air, that I understood. All three of them. The same wish, the same name, delivered at the end of each of their lives like a confession they had been holding back for years. They had all loved Zhang Yida. Zhang Yida, who was the son of the Yi family's housekeeper. Ordinary in appearance, unremarkable in talent, seemingly content to drift through his days without ambition or direction. I had never understood what drew them to him. I had spent an entire life trying to understand it and arrived at nothing. But I had arrived at something else. Each of them had accepted the marriage alliance, in her own way and for her own reasons, to protect him. As long as one of them was married to me, the family's attention and resources would flow in a direction that left Zhang Yida safely peripheral. It was a sacrifice framed as love, and it had consumed all three of them. And consumed me, though no one seemed to account for that. I had spent one complete lifetime as the supporting character in a story that was never about me. I had grieved three women who never truly belonged to me and carried the weight of their deaths without ever understanding why they had chosen to leave the way they did. I had grown old believing I had simply been unlucky, when the truth was that I had never been the person any of them were living for. That was finished now. I looked at my parents across the table and told them I would not be choosing any of the three. If a marriage alliance was genuinely necessary, I had a different name to offer. Bai Ningbing, of the Bai family in Beijing. My father's expression shifted into something between confusion and alarm. My mother looked as though she had misheard. Bai Ningbing, the illegitimate daughter of the Bai family. Why on earth would I want her? I kept my voice level and my reasons practical. In my previous life, Bai Ningbing had become the wealthiest woman in the world. Not by inheritance, not by marriage, by force of her own particular intelligence, a clarity of vision that other people in the same rooms as her consistently underestimated until it was too late. She had climbed to the top of every list that mattered and stayed there. If the purpose of this marriage was to benefit the family, then the calculation was straightforward. No alliance I could form would produce greater returns over time. I laid it out for them. The Bai family's momentum was strong. The Bai Group was the leading family enterprise in the region, and my parents had long wanted to establish roots there without having the foundation to do it. Marrying into that family was the foundation. And my mother had once said, in passing, that Bai Ningbing was a girl of unusual ambition with a sharper eye for the future than most men 3 times her age. Had she forgotten saying that? She had not forgotten. Neither had my father. I watched the calculation move across their faces, the initial resistance giving way to something more thoughtful. After some deliberation, they agreed. They contacted the Bai family. The arrangements were set in motion, and within a short time the answer came back, settled. The wedding would take place in half a month. When I heard it confirmed, I felt the tension in my chest release for the first time in what felt like years. My parents left to begin preparing the bride price, and I sat alone in the living room for a while, letting the reality of it settle. The house was quiet. My thoughts moved in slow circles. Then the door opened. Lu Ruan, Shun Yuchu, and Leah came in together, which was not unusual. The 4 of us had grown up practically inseparable, so close that separateness had always felt slightly wrong, like a word spelled incorrectly. They crossed the room and stopped in front of me, and they asked, in near-perfect unison, who I had chosen. Their faces were serious, tense, nervous in a way they were trying to conceal and not quite managing. I looked at them and remembered everything. The years of being treated like something precious. Every gift given without being asked for, every slight defended against, every low mood carefully managed by one or all 3 of them in rotation. I had believed for a long time that it was love, the particular kind that childhood produces between people who grow up side by side. I had believed I was important to them. What I understood now, watching their faces, was that the nervousness was not anticipation. They were afraid of being chosen. They were asking because they needed to know what they were dealing with, not because they were hoping for a particular answer. My chest tightened. I held the feeling at a distance and let it pass. I told them they would have their answer in 15 days. They pushed back, wanting something more definite, wanting to be able to stop worrying, and then my phone rang. The voice on the other end was the housekeeper Zong, barely holding himself together. His son had been in a road accident, seriously injured. The hospital was having difficulty with the room assignment. Could I help? Before I could respond, Lu Ruan took the phone out of my hand. Her voice, asking which hospital, was sharp with an urgency I had never heard her direct at me. She had the name within seconds and was already turning away. She told me, over her shoulder, not to worry about the hospital. She would handle it. It was a small thing. Shun Yuchu and Leah followed without a beat of hesitation. One family owned the hospital. The other had connections to the best specialist physicians in the country. They covered the logistics between them efficiently, neatly, without any apparent awareness of what they were demonstrating. They had claimed to be doing it for my benefit. The fiction was so thin I could see through it without effort. I watched them go and felt something settle in me that was not grief exactly, more like the quiet relief of finally knowing the shape of something that had always been blurry. I turned away and went to my bedroom and gathered everything. The gifts, the keepsakes, the photographs, the dresses I had once designed for them. By the time I finished, it was dark outside. I opened my phone and saw a post from Zong Yida. A selfie taken from a VIP hospital room. He was eating a bowl of soup, Leah's signature recipe, recognizable from the container. On the table beside him was Lu Ruan's watch. Draped over the chair was Shun Yuchu's coat. He had captioned it simply, "Another day of being specially cared for by the 3 young ladies." I looked at the photograph for a while. Then I set my phone down and turned to the 3 boxes sitting on the floor beside me. Each box contained a gift from one of the 3 families, delivered on my 18th birthday, presented as heirlooms, understood by everyone as the tokens that would eventually indicate which marriage alliance the Yi family intended to pursue. I had carried these boxes for years, and now they had served their purpose. I contacted a courier and arranged for all 3 to be returned to their respective addresses in 15 days, precisely when the families would be expecting an answer. Then I threw away everything else. The luxury items and figurines, and small tokens Lu Ruan had pressed into my hands over the years. The videos, the photographs, the objects that had accumulated between us like evidence of something that had not, it turned out, been what I thought it was. I let all of it go with the focused calm of someone who has already grieved and is now simply clearing space. I spent the following days absorbed in wedding preparations, suit fittings, accessory choices, the pleasant distraction of logistics. I try not to pay attention to anything else. Coming home one afternoon, I found the three of them arranged around Zhang Yida in the living room. One was adjusting the temperature on the air conditioner. One was carefully cooling a spoonful of medicine before offering it to him. One was tucking a blanket around his legs with the attentiveness of someone who finds this genuinely important. He sat at the center of it all, looking comfortable, slightly embarrassed by the attention, and not particularly inclined to move. I stood in the doorway and took it in. One lifetime of not seeing this clearly. One lifetime of telling myself it meant something else. Zhang Yida noticed me and scrambled upright immediately, his face arranging itself into an expression of conscientious guilt. He announced that he would go prepare my bath water and dinner, and please wait just a moment. Lu Ruan caught his arm before he could stand fully. She told him he was still recovering and that the house had other servants. I was perfectly capable of getting by without inconveniencing him. Shin Yuchu and Leah agreed immediately. He was too badly injured to be running around. If the house was actually shorthanded, they could send servants from their own households. He should rest. I had not yet said a single word since walking in, and I had already been assigned several unspoken criticisms. I took a slow breath. I know he's the housekeeper's son, not a servant. I have never treated him as one. I looked at each of them in turn. If his being here worries you this much, take him home with you. You can look after him there. Then you won't have to spend your time concerned. Zhang Yida dropped immediately to his knees and pressed his forehead to the floor. He said it was his fault for being negligent while sick. He said he would go do the chores immediately. His forehead was red from the impact, and he wore the expression of someone enduring a tremendous injustice. The three of them stepped in front of him like a wall. Their tones, when they spoke, had a particular edge to them, the kind that is technically polite and functionally contemptuous. He had done nothing wrong. Why was I trying to drive him away for no reason? He was injured and had still been thinking about serving me. Didn't I have any compassion at all? If his condition worsened because of additional stress, would I be satisfied? I kept my voice even. I suggested you could take him somewhere more comfortable. That is all I said. Am I so unreasonable in your understanding of me that any grievance he encounters must be my fault by default? The room went quiet. I did not wait for an answer. There was nothing more I wanted to say. I went to my bedroom and sat with the silence until my heart rate returned to normal. A knock came some time later. Zhang Yida, holding a cup of coffee, wearing his most carefully constructed expression of timid apology. He said it was his fault that we had argued. He asked me not to be angry with the three young ladies. He said if anyone deserved blame, it was him. I knew what this was. I had seen it work before across an entire previous lifetime. Put the coffee down and leave, I said. His expression shifted into something more wounded. He moved to set the cup on the table and managed, very convincingly, to lose his grip on it. The coffee came down across my arm. The burn was immediate and sharp, rising into blisters within seconds. I shoved him back by reflex, and he fell with expert precision, his head connecting with the edge of the table just hard enough to split the skin and produce a considerable amount of blood. The sound he made brought all three of them through the door before I had processed what had just happened. Shin Yuchu pushed past me without looking at me. Lu Ruan went straight to Zhang Yida on the floor. Leah pressed her hand over the wound. They gathered him up and moved him out of the room with the unified urgency of people responding to a genuine crisis, leaving me standing against the wall where I had been knocked when Shun Yuchu shoved past. The glass cabinet behind me had shattered. Pieces of it were embedded in my clothes and skin. Blood was coming through the fabric in several places. I stood there and watched them go. I did not call after them. I did not make any sound at all. I stood until the pain became something I could categorize and manage, and then I went to the bathroom and cleaned what I could, and then I went to the hospital. I was waiting at the prescription counter when I recognized voices in the corridor nearby. Lu Ruan, Shun Yuchu, and Leah were standing outside Zhang Yida's hospital room. Their voices were low but clear enough. They were talking about getting him out of the Yi household. Once the marriage alliance was settled, once one of them was bound to me and the family's attention was secured, they would find a way to remove him from the situation entirely. They didn't want him absorbing any more harm. Their parents now knew the truth, that he was their real love, and his safety had to come first. Whoever was chosen, that person would simply have to accept the arrangement without complaint. I stood in the corridor and listened to the full shape of it. In my previous life, I had wondered in my worst moments why they had agreed to marriages they clearly didn't want. I had told myself maybe they had felt something for me after all, or maybe they were being responsible, or maybe time had changed things. I had constructed many explanations because the truth was one I hadn't been ready to carry. They had married me to protect him. Each of them, in her turn, had calculated that a marriage to me was the price of keeping Zhang Yida safe from the family's attention and expectations. What they had destroyed in the process, my years, my belief in the relationships I thought we had, my entire understanding of my own life, had simply not entered the calculation. I lowered my head in the corridor and laughed until my eyes watered. It came out silent, shaking through my chest without sound. At least this time, none of them would have to make that sacrifice. I had already made my decision, and it had nothing to do with any of them. I composed myself, wiped my face, and turned to leave. My phone rang at the same moment, loud enough that the door to the hospital room opened. 3 faces appeared and looked at me with overlapping questions. Why was I here? Was I here to apologize? How long had I been standing there? What had happened to my body? I answered them in order. The injuries were from the glass cabinet, when Shin Yuchu pushed past me to reach Zhang Yida. I was here to treat them, not to apologize because he had spilled the coffee on me first and I had reacted by pushing him back. His fall was accidental. As I described it, I watched their expressions shift through several stages. A brief debate with themselves, something that looked like reluctant acknowledgement. Shin Yuchu spoke first, which was typical of her. She conceded that the coffee spill had probably been accidental. He was weak, his grip was poor. I shouldn't hold it against him. They had panicked when they came in and saw the blood, and they had overreacted. They were sorry. Lu Ruan followed with her own version of the same apology, and then immediately asked whether I had made a decision about the marriage. Leah moved closer and told me they had never wanted to pressure me, but they wanted to stop dreading the answer. Could I please just tell them? I watched them watching me, their tension barely contained. And then the monitor inside the room began beeping in rapid, relentless pulses. All 3 of them went pale and turned back into the room simultaneously. Medical staff converged from the corridor. The situation resolved itself into urgent voices and equipment being moved and a doctor delivering a diagnosis in the careful, apologetic tone of someone delivering bad news. Improper medication following the second injury. Renal failure. The situation was serious. Lu Ruan's eyes went red immediately. She grabbed the nearest physician and demanded to know how this had been allowed to happen. Shin Yuchu had the chief physician by the collar within seconds, voice stripped of its usual composure, giving him 30 minutes to produce a complete treatment plan. Leah was already on her phone, calling a nephrologist she knew by name, asking him to come personally. The room descended into controlled chaos. I stayed in the corridor. The only viable option, the doctors concluded, was a transplant. Finding a compatible kidney source would take time, and time was a problem. Before the sentence was fully finished, all 3 women were already asking to be tested. The results came back quickly. Lu Ruan was a match. She signed the consent form without pause and walked into the operating room. The wait was long. Then a nurse came out in near run, her voice strained. The blood bank was critically low. The patient needed more than standard reserves. Shin Yuchu and Leah were already rolling up their sleeves. The staff hesitated. 2 donors wouldn't be sufficient given the rate of hemorrhage. The women told them to take whatever they needed. As long as it was enough to save him, quantity was not the concern. I watched all of this from a chair in the corridor. In my previous life, I had not been present for the moments when Lu Ruan and Shun Yuchu died because of Zhang Yida. I had learned the details afterward, sitting with grief that I hadn't known how to hold because I hadn't understood its shape. I had not been able to comprehend why they would go that far. Having now watched it happen in real time, I understood completely. This was not duty or obligation dressed up as love. They loved him the way people love when they're not protecting themselves at all, entirely, practically, without apparent regard for what it cost. He was the reason everything else in their lives was arranged the way it was. He was the reason I had spent one complete lifetime alone. I could not compete with that. I had never been competing with that. I had simply been standing in the same vicinity and mistaking proximity for meaning. The operating room light went out. The surgeon came through the doors and found me in the corridor, apparently assuming I was a family member. The operation had succeeded. The patient would recover. The kidney donor would need observation in the ICU. The two women in the blood donation room had both lost consciousness from the amount drawn. He asked if I could manage care for all 4 patients on my own. I told him I had no relation to any of them. Then I sent messages to the Liu family, the Shun family, the Lai family, and the housekeeper Zong, explaining the situation and asking them to come. As I put my phone away and prepared to leave, I caught the tail end of a quiet conversation between 2 nurses passing behind me. They were speculating about whether I was the husband of one of the women and agreeing that I probably wasn't, and noting that if your wife abandoned herself entirely for another man, what kind of husband could stand for that? And clearly all 3 of those women were in love with the same person. I listened without turning around. They were not wrong about anything. I dragged myself home in the dark, moving slowly, every cut and bruise from the glass cabinet making itself known. My parents were waiting up and looked alarmed when they saw me. I gave them an abbreviated version of events. Nothing serious, healing quickly. Please don't worry. And they accepted it with visible relief. They handed me a small box. The marriage token from a Bai family had arrived. They had received the one we sent, and the exchange had been completed. My parents mentioned, almost as an aside, that the Liu family, the Shun family, and the Lai family had all called. The elders on those sides had offered reassurances that their daughters were simply being kind, that their real affections lay with me, and that nothing should be read into recent events. My parents found themselves without a good response to give, and they wanted me to handle it as I saw fit. I was old enough to manage my own affairs. They trusted me. I thanked them and went to bed. Over the following days, I began researching the Bai family in earnest, their business structure, their culture, Bai Ningbing's particular preferences and habits, and assembled a considered selection of gifts accordingly. The shopping took a full day. I came home with the car loaded and found a different kind of assembly waiting for me. Lu Ruan, Shun Yuchu, and Leah were standing at the door. Behind them, the living room had been filled with gifts, elaborate, expensive, formally presented, sent by their respective families as apologies for the hospital incident, and delivered personally for what I assumed was a dual purpose. They took turns explaining. The gifts were from their families. They had been asked to come in person. They were sorry for how things had gone. Zhang Yida's life had been hanging by a thread. Emotions had run high. It had not been fair to me. I should direct any remaining frustration toward them, not escalate it to the families or to him. I told them to take the gifts back. I had no intention of making trouble over any of it. I was tired and wanted to rest. As I said this, I shifted my bag, and the box containing the Bai family's tokens slipped out and fell near Lu Ruan's feet. She picked it up automatically. Then she saw what she was holding, and her expression changed. Shin Yuchu and Leah looked over, and their expressions changed too. A marriage token. I had already chosen. They asked me immediately, the question coming out of all 3 of them in slightly different formations. Was it one of them? Which one? Why wouldn't I tell them? I reached over and took the box back before they could open it. Their attention fixed on my face. Lu Ruan was the one who left the question unfinished, and I understood what she hadn't said. She was afraid it was her name inside the box. All 3 of them were afraid of the same thing, and they were standing in front of me watching my face for any information I might accidentally give them. I forced a steady smile. "It has nothing to do with any of you," I said. "You don't need to be nervous." Shin Yuchu grabbed my hand, her voice sharpening with something that might have been genuine distress. The agreement had always been that the alliance would come from one of their three families. There was no other option. Why was I saying it had nothing to do with them? Leah pressed closer. They had never rushed me, she said. They had been patient. But if I had a final answer, they deserved to hear it directly. They wanted the uncertainty to end. So marrying someone you don't want to marry is what they were calling uncertainty. I breathed through it. I opened the box and held up the watch. Brilliant and precise. Unmistakably not a family heirloom from any of the three households. Their eyes moved from the watch to the car full of gifts I brought home, and I could see the moment the understanding arrived. This was not from any of them. I had gone shopping. Lu Ruan assumed I had simply bought something I liked and moved quickly to help clasp it on my wrist, commenting that it suited me. Shin Yuchu gave it a genuine compliment and said it was beautiful. Leah took several photographs on her phone, saying she wanted to remember it. 3 genuine smiles, appearing on their faces for the first time since I'd come back. They were smiling because they believed I hadn't chosen yet, that the alliance was still open, that there was still time. I almost said something. Then Zhang Yida walked in from the hallway, stopped at the sight of all the gifts piled in the living room, and brightened with unconcealed delight. I told him they were for me, but that I didn't want them. He could have them if he liked. He looked disbelieving, pointing at himself and asking if I was joking. The 3 women were already turning toward him, their smiles shifting into the softer, warmer version they reserved for him. They started pushing the gifts in his direction, telling him he deserved every one of them, insisting he try things on, promising to help him choose what suited him best. I went upstairs and closed my door. The watch was cold against my wrist. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at it in the low light and thought about the ways people get used to things that are uncomfortable if they wear them long enough. A few days later, I came down with a fever. They heard about it quickly, as they always did, and began rotating through the house, present every day, attentive in their way, bringing things and checking temperatures and adjusting pillows. But the hours they spent in my room were a small fraction of the hours they spent downstairs with Zhang Yida. I could hear them teaching him to play chess in the qin, hear them in the garden helping him water the plants, hear them asking him to hold still so they could take his photograph. I listened from my bed and did not say anything about it. When they came upstairs to check on me, they noticed things that were missing from my room. The phone chain Lu Ruan had given me, the bracelet Shin Yuchu had insisted on displaying, the photograph from when we were 18. Each one asked about it and accepted the vague answers I gave without pressing further. They were puzzled. They had no framework yet for what was actually happening. My birthday was approaching. My fever was almost gone. The night before the banquet, my parents came to me with 2 instructions. I sat and listened.